Welcome to the Kentucky Kernel Sports Podcast on the Kentucky Kernel Podcast Network. Welcome to the Kentucky Kernel Sports Podcast. I'm Alden Flowers, and I'm the podcast host here at the Kernel. I'm joined by three new members of the podcast today. We'll be doing this every week we'll have three new members now, and we'll just introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Josh Smith. I'm from here in Lexington, Kentucky, and I am a freshman.
I'm Michaela. I'm from Atlanta, and I'm a senior.
I'm Jonathan. I'm a sophomore, and I'm from here in Lexington.
All right, before we get into the meat and the potatoes of the podcast here, I do have to go ahead and say that all of our opinions are our opinions, and they are not the opinions of the Kernel, and they do not reflect how the entire Kernel thinks. But with that, we all have our opinions on how Devin Leary has done at quarterback, especially this past week with a close win over EKU. Did you guys see improvements from week one? Last week, the podcast was they had their opinions when it came to the way Devin had played in week one. Did we see improvement?
I think it's very lazy, honestly, to blame Devin Leary for Kentucky's offensive issues. I have in front of me his EPA, which is expected points added. And let's talk about that stat really quick. So we can calculate the expected result of a play using the EPA stat. And basically, if your EPA is positive, then you performed better on a given stat, whereas if your EPA is negative, you're below it. Last week, Devin Leary had the highest EPA on the Kentucky football offense. The only person that was second was Tavion Robinson, who, mind you, had the best individual offensive performance, arguably, of the EKU game. So there's clearly merit to the stats if the second most efficient person is one of the best performers. And Devin Leary's EPA was 13.1, meaning he's adding nearly two touchdowns to the 28-point performance against EKU. And even when you look at the film, the ball is coming out of his hands well, I think, at times. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and deny that he's inaccurate on some of his passes at times. I'm not going to sit here and deny that he's having issues with the deep ball. But then again, he was never advertised as a deep ball quarterback. I think that he is suffering with some of the residual expectations of Will Levis. And I think that fans need to understand that this is a different quarterback and thus a different play style. Just because Kentucky has fast receivers who can go down and make those 70, 80-yard plays doesn't mean that Devin Leary can sling it 60 yards to get it there. It's going to be an earlier throw. But when you look at the numbers and you see just how efficient he is, he was the most efficient player on the field for Kentucky in the third and fourth quarters. Now, he was bad in the first, but it's a four-quarter game, and we know that because Kentucky won the game in the third and fourth quarter. So I just think it's a very lazy take to blame him, and I think it's a sign that, honestly, to put very bluntly, you're either not watching film or you're not following closely if you're blaming him for Kentucky's issues.
Do you guys want to add anything to that?
I just think he's not used to this new offense. Like, back in NC State, he was more like a slower quarterback, like getting time in. This is a very up-tempo type offense that they want to do here. And I feel like he just has to, keep going. It's 2 games in also. And I feel like they want to, kind of change the way he played at NC State and kind of make him to, Will Levis. But, he's not Will Levis. So I feel like they have to, find, a medium with, the offense he did at NC State to now at Kentucky, I feel like.
And I kind of agree with that. I think that some of his misses that are a little rough looking that kind of create the headline, so to speak, of is he good or is he not. I think some of those are rough, but it seems like to me that he has a bit of inaccuracy issues when he's rushed. So when they try to push the tempo, to me seems like when he kind of starts to not really panic, but try to get the ball out faster, and I think that results in some of his inaccuracies. But to piggyback off that, I do think his second half proved that he can bounce back. In the second half, he was 10 for 13 for 3 touchdowns and averaging 15 yards a play. So, I mean, that was very impressive, his ability to realize that first half was not pretty, to say the least, and bounce back and rally the offense to what was a good second half to me.
I think if we want to talk stats, there are 2 important stats to talk about. First, to Michaela's point, North Carolina didn't run a much slower offense than Kentucky's trying to run this year. And I know people might be quick to blame the change in rules with the faster clock, but teams are only losing 2 possessions a game to the updated rule changes. And that's an aggregate statistic from all of the, I think it's 133, correct me if I'm wrong, FBS teams.
I think that's right.
It's either like 133 or like 134. But I think that it's not an issue of adjustment. I think it's or anything like that. I think it's more of a matter of play calling on Liam Cohen's end. Post game, Cohen actually said that the main change between the first half and the second half was that he started calling more plays that he knew worked for his offense. That was that explains a lot of the issues that the offense had in the first half against EKU. It explains the wide receiver drops. It explains the missed coverage, and explains the fact that EKU, for some reason, even though UK has some of the fastest receivers in the SEC, were able to stay in the hip pockets of our guys. It's different. It's a different offense. But he also used the word, and I love this, catch-22, Alden. And I want you, even though you're the podcast host, I think you should weigh in on his usage of the word catch-22, because he said, obviously these games are bye games, right? And these are the games when, you're trying out your new things, you're trying out your crafty stuff. Because, when they what happened was, if you want to put it bluntly, UK sat up in their gaming chairs when they saw that they were down at halftime to EKU. That's why Liam Cohen went back to calling the stuff that he knew works. And that's why the metrics show that UK was so much more efficient offensively. UK knows what works, guys. UK has an offense that they are confident in, and they have an offense that they know can score points. What it's about now is craftiness. It's about changing things up. It's about expanding the capabilities of the offense to beat a team like Tennessee and to beat a team like Georgia, because by the time we get to those games, especially Alabama as well in November, they're going to have it figured out, and there's going to be enough on film to be able to stop some of the conventional plays that they're using. So UK has to get crafty, and they're never going to get crafty if they don't practice against teams like Ball State and EKU and Akron, except the downside is that they're stumbling out of the gate when they do. So I think I definitely agree with Liam Cohen and his bit about the catch-22, but to me, and we can touch on this here in a second, I think the main issue is how they're coming out of the locker room.
And yeah, I definitely agree in that way, and I think that part of it is because we know we are not even playing a team that's towards the top of the G5 for whatever that means now with all the realignment. We're playing a team that's not going to win the MAC in Ball State. We're playing an FCS team in Eastern Kentucky. There was less than a 1% chance that we lost either one of those games going in. This week will be a little bit tougher of a game, still not super tough with Akron. But I'm excited to see if we try to go back to more of the interesting kind of trick play, kind of more tougher to execute plays here in the first half against Akron, or if we just come out and we try to just destroy them from point one to point end. With some of the stuff that we know for a fact is going to work.
Right, and Cohen showed trips. We've seen Kentucky come out in trips. We've seen him come out in some different packages, centered around some different guys. There's no doubt in my mind that Kentucky has or that Liam Cohen and the Kentucky offense has the craftiness needed. I think now it really boils down to a matter of execution. And going back to, and part of that does fall on Devin Leary. But the thing about Devin Leary, you mentioned when he's in a hurry, he only got sacked twice in the game against EKU. He had all the time in the world in the pocket.
To an extent, I didn't mean rush as in he was hurried as a quarterback. I mean, it seemed to me that he was rushing himself, kind of going too fast when he didn't need to, because typically we're not used to the Kentucky offensive line being very good, but at least in this game they were okay. They got the job done, and he had plenty of time on some of those deeper passes when they kind of got it together in the second half. But as far as it looked like he was trying to get the ball out of his hand as fast as he got it in his hand, and it just didn't feel like that was really necessary. And that seemed when he ran into some of those problems to me.
I think it's definitely a stretch to say that the offensive line hasn't been good in the last few years. I think it's just not the big blue wall that Kentucky fans are accustomed to back in, the Lynn Bowden era of the program, right? But I definitely agree that he gets happy feet at times, right? That's a way to put it. And I think that when you watch the film as well, that the ball is coming off of his hands really well.
And I think that that will lead us very well into the positives from week 2 outside of just Devin Leary. I think the offensive line play, as you mentioned, was a huge positive for us. But how about this defense, guys? This defense is flying everywhere. We've given up some long drives to start the year on some interesting we had the read option drive against the first team we played where they just, every single play all the way down the field was a read option. It took like 8 minutes and they scored a touchdown. But other than that, we haven't had much issue stopping these lesser teams on offense.
I think that's been a great. They've had a great start to the year. I think it's been very encouraging as we inch closer to those bigger games where they're going to need to keep us in the game against very higher-powered offenses to give our offense a chance to kind of showcase what they can do while it's still being a game. And their ability to do a lot of things well has – and like defensive coordinator said after the game, like there's still room for improvement. There's still some things they were a bit sloppy on. So knowing that they're still continuing to build and seeing what they've done so far, it's got to make you a little bit excited for what's to come with this defense.
Yeah, I think Trevin Wallace, he was amazing. He had six tackles in the first half, and he caused a fumble, and he's on his way to a really big season. He was SEC Defensive Player of the Week, and I feel like with him, he really sets the tone with the defense, and also he also had the fumble recovered, and Maxwell Harrison too also had his first career interception. So I really do think the defense, they were forced to make big plays early, I feel like, and they definitely did. They kept us in the game when the offense was kind of sluggish in the first half.
I think that one of the strengths of Kentucky's defense is how they let their linebackers, how Brad White lets his linebackers go out, run free, and make plays. That's always been the centerpiece of Kentucky's defense. But there's another issue with Brad White's defense that has shown itself in the last, I believe this is his 6th or 7th year here, and that's havoc rates. That's another stat I'm going to bring into the equation here. Havoc rates, or in this case, is when the secondary breaks up or defends or intercepts a pass. Kentucky defended 3.7%. I'm going to say that again, 3.7% of passes against Eastern Kentucky, an FCS program. Mind you, this is a SEC Power 5, cream of the crop level secondary we're supposed to have. And they're defending 3.7% of passes. EKU, on the other hand, defended 9.4% of Kentucky's passes. I don't necessarily disagree that the defense is going to be one of the. Obviously defense is important. Defense wins games, right? But I definitely do have questions about the Kentucky secondary if they're only able to defend 3.7% of EKU's passes. What's that number going? Really quick, I heard you breathe, but slow your roll. But and I don't want to say this as if the secondary sucks, right? But I think that there is now a pattern of the secondary underperforming, and I think and that could be in the attribution there could be something similar to Liam Cohen in the offense, where it's plays that didn't work, and I think Kentucky's nickel package looked really good, right? The nickel package looks good. I think didn't they even come out and dime a couple of times? I could be wrong. Like Brad White's, I have no doubts in Brad White's defense, but I do have a concern about the secondary and their ability to defend passes, especially when it's time for an air raid offense like, say, Tennessee.
And can you tell me exactly what the defended passes? What does that mean? Is that a defender gets a hand on the ball, or a defender stops? Is that just a defender is stopping them from catching, or if it's a drop?
Yeah, so really anything that can be attributed to the defense, right? So an interception counts here, a pass breakup counts here, but it's not going to count, for example, if it's like a super inaccurate target from the quarterback. It's not going to count if the wide receiver drops the ball, right? But anything that the defense does to break up the pass, to defend the pass, or even to intercept it, that's factored in. And it's also exclusionary of garbage time minutes as well. So we're not counting, the last drive of the game when,
And another big positive, and I felt it, I don't know if you guys were at the game or not, but I was there and I was in the student section, and I could feel the energy throughout the entire time I was there. 61,876 is the announced attendance. That's more than the 61,000 total that is announced capacity at Kroger. That's great for a game against an FCS team like EKU, even though it is an in-state rivalry.
Sounds like we have a fire marshal hazard is what we've got.
And I mean, I think that Kentucky has always been kind of one of those places where, kind of like if you build it, they'll come. It's like it kind of showed last year. If you build a team that can be successful and can play close against good teams, the Big Blue Nation will show out week in, week out to root on the Wildcats and see if the hype is worth it or if this team just doesn't got it.
I think if you build it, they will come is a perfect way to put it. I have zero doubts in the energy of the BBN. I have zero doubts in the fact that the men on the field for the Wildcats are the boys. You know, I mean, after all, these are college kids. Let's never forget that we're talking about college kids, and I say that as a college kid myself. But you know, the boys, the men, however you want to call it, right? The people on the field,
the
dudes, right? There's going to be plenty of BBN backing them, especially when it comes time for Alabama in November, especially when it comes time for Florida here in 2 weeks, especially when it's time for even the Missouri game, which is still a conference opponent. But I mean, obviously, I don't think Kentucky's looking past Missouri, but as fans, you know, I think the games that are circled on our calendars, that might not necessarily be one of them. But even for that, I'm definitely looking to see sellouts, and honestly, as a student, an awful time trying to get a ticket.
when you think BBN, the mind tends to jump straight to basketball. You see the crowds on television when it comes to March, and when it's SEC tournament time, it's blue. But they do travel for football as well, and they really show up at home for football. It's good crowds no matter what the sport.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly my point. BBN is BBN. I mean, we all saw the baseball regional, right? We saw the volleyball team. We saw it when the volleyball team won the national title. Right, we've seen it. I mean, I've seen it in men's soccer. Right, I mean, it's BBN is definitely something that's very all encompassing, and I think that it stretches beyond just basketball and football. And I think that that's something. And I say this. I mean, obviously, we're not affiliated with the university, or we're not. I don't speak on this as a fan. I just say this objectively. I think that the fan base is something that or that really deserves a lot of credit. And I think part of that is the fact, to your point, that the athletic department, the football program, it's been built. They've built it, right? And the fans are coming.
I think this is a good time to kind of jump into, we're going to try something new, and we're going to play a game this week on the show. The game this week is going to be called Guess That Sport. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read off a couple different facts or stats about a team over the last couple of years here at UK, and everybody will get a chance to guess. And then I'll tell you what the sport actually was, and we'll see by the end who has the most points, or whatever we want to call it, for who wins the game.
I'm about to go 0 for 4.
I have a feeling you guys will do pretty well. These aren't the toughest. Well, the last one might be a little tough, but these aren't the hardest. All right, the first one, and please play from home and let us know how you did. This sport won a championship 4 years ago, has not missed an NCAA tournament since 2018, and is enjoying their stay at Rupp Arena this year for the first time.
Oh, my first.
Yeah.
What is volleyball?
Yeah, it's volleyball.
Yeah, I think it's volleyball.
For sure, volleyball.
3 for 3. There you go. We got volleyball playing their first season at Rupp this year. I've made it out to a game, gotten to go watch them play. Very good. They're very fun to watch. All right, here goes the second one. This team just completed its first perfect non-conference season, and they have a player that is about to become Kentucky's all-time leading scorer in this sport.
It can't be. I don't think it's soccer. Wait, no. It's men's soccer. What is men's soccer?
Women's soccer.
Men's soccer, sure.
It is women's soccer.
Okay, nice job.
Jordan Rhodes, 2 goals from becoming Kentucky's all-time leading goal scorer.
Very cool.
All right, third one. This team has won 73 contests over the last 2 years and made a super regional appearance last year, and their coach celebrated a birthday this past week.
What is baseball?
Baseball.
Baseball.
Perfect. 3 for 3. Coach Mingione celebrating his birthday last week.
Happy belated, Coach.
This one,
related.
this one is tough. So good luck. This team completed last season with a record of 8-1 and finished third in the national championships. 2 years ago, they won a national championship, and they opened their season on October 14th.
They opened their season on October 14th. Gymnastics. That can't be right, but gymnastics.
I have no idea.
Give us a guess.
I'm going to go with what he said. Gymnastics. Let's see.
I'm going to go process of elimination of just kind of the sports that have not started yet that are sports on campus. I'm going to say rifle.
Ding, ding, ding. It's rifle.
Oh, I forgot about rifle. Oh.
So I think that gives us a tie at
give us a
2
tie.
and 1 with Jonathan and Michaela winning. Josh finishing at the bottom this week.
Hey, who's surprised? Who is surprised? Do I win like a toilet bowl award?
No awards this week, but maybe in the future we'll start having some awards for winning the show, winning the game on the show of the week.
Do they mail it to me with the Jets Lombardi trophy?
All right. Well, that was fun, and we'll get back to kind of more Kentucky football focus, as that's kind of what we're talking about this week. What was the biggest changes we saw from week 1 to week 2, whether that be less of the tough plays that we have already talked about or better play from individual people? What were the biggest changes we saw?
I would say just not really a change, but just you can see the team continuing to settle in. They're kind of starting to figure out what works and what doesn't, what they're going to run with as we gear towards SEC play and get deeper into the part of the schedule that really is going to make or break this team. I think you can just kind of tell that they're really starting to figure out what works and what doesn't. Just kind of getting the team together to gear up for these big time matchups that they're going to have to be on their game for to be competitive in.
Another change I seen was Trevion Robinson. He had 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. I really do think he was like the difference maker, and I really do think if he continues to kind of keep doing as he was doing last game, we can really it can really make a difference with the team. And just seeing him being able to kind of like spark the offense. I feel like when he scored that touchdown, kind of like sparked the offense, and it was able to like switch the ties in the game. So I think he kind of like developing more with the team. He was like a big change for me that I seen on Saturday.
I think for me, and it's maybe between the week 1 and week 2, but I think the emergence of Trayvon Wallace.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a change from last season, of course, but I think between week 1 and week 2, the difference was that you could really notice the impact that he had on the game, even though he had 5 less total tackles. That's the big thing. Week 1, he had 12 tackles. Week 2, he had 7, but 5 of those were solo tackles. He had a solo sack, right? I think that I talk about linebackers, running free. I talk about them making plays, right, and being kind of the center point of Brad White's defensive scheme, and I think that Trayvon Wallace has now emerged as a centerpiece to that. He's proven himself as that, and that was a question we had in week 1. Not necessarily Trayvon Wallace's ability, but all right, who are the playmakers going to be on this Kentucky defense? Who's going to step up, right? Especially with some of the departures that we've had to just in transfers into the NFL.
Yeah, and this may not be a change from week 1 to week 2, but from half 1 to half 2 this week.
Yeah.
There was a extreme change in just control of the game from Kentucky. After halftime, it just felt like there was nothing EKU could do when it came to us. I mean, it felt like UK had complete control of the game.
Yeah. I think that kind of speaks to their ability to just kind of really focus and settle in and bounce back from sloppy play and kind of just settle back down to what they knew they could do to a team like EKU.
I think control is a reach. I think control is definitely a reach. I think I really do. I realize I'm joking when I'm saying sitting up in the gaming chairs, but I think we can differentiate control of a game from a sense of urgency and a willingness to compete. I think I talk and I actually touch on this in one of my articles that's about to come out, and it might even be out by the time this podcast drops. I'm not sure. There is I mentioned a couple of advanced stats in this episode, right? We talked about stats and how Devin Leary's arm looked on film and things like that. None of that matters if Kentucky can't come out of the locker room. And that has been this team's biggest shortcoming in the first 2 weeks, is that they can't come out of the locker room, and we are yet to see them play 4 consecutive quarters. And I'm not talking the last 2 quarters to the first 2 quarters or vice versa. This team has not played 4 consecutive quarters. They need to come out of the locker room. And I think control of a game, part of it does involve execution of plays, which we did see. But I would attribute that to a sense of urgency, to a pulse, if you will, to the team finally showing a pulse, as opposed to necessarily being in control. I think it was, oh, crap. And I substitute crap for the other word that, Mark Stoops probably said in the locker room. We got to quit looking at the scoreboard and make a play. Yeah. I don't think this team was ever in control until they were in the lead.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
This team was not the team on Saturday. If we were watching the same team, they were not in control until they took the lead and until they could settle down. But there was a change. I do agree that there was a change in fight between halves. There was a change in urgency, and probably because they knew that, oh my gosh, we have our backs against the wall to an FCS opponent.
Yeah, because go ahead. At the end of the day, let's have a sense of realism of. No one actually thought, as bad as they could have played, that EKU was actually going to win the football game. But it was just alarming to see how long Kentucky kind of allowed them to stick around and make it a game when it should not have been a game at all. They entered the game as 35-point favorites and didn't even put up 35 points themselves. So, and kind of you said the slow starts, it's going to get them beat in the SEC. They cannot afford to get up to slow starts to Florida, to Tennessee, to Alabama, to Georgia, or it's going to be, you won't see them play 4 quarters because it'll be a halftime game. The game will be over before they even go to the locker room if they continue to have these sluggish starts. They just can't afford to do it.
Well, and if I can chime in really quick, we mentioned Florida, Tennessee, Alabama. Let's forget about them for a minute. What about your South Carolinas? Yeah. What about your Mississippi States, right? What about your Vanderbilts? What about those guys? Yeah. That's when coming out of the locker room is going to matter. Right? Because I cannot imagine a metaverse in which
metaverse,
or was it like an alternate universe? I can't imagine a world, a situation in which the team isn't fired up to play Florida or Alabama. The team was not fired up to play EKU. The team was not fired up to play Ball State. And honestly, I'm curious to see how they come out against Akron, which we can touch on in a moment.
Yeah,
but I think the big question mark is going to be, how is the team going to come out of the locker room against those opponents that, even as analysts, as fans, however you want to call yourself, are looking past. If the 4 people at this table are looking past those opponents, is the team as well?
Yeah, and I think that is showed through the first 2 games. It seems like to me this team came in with a lot of hype, and it seems like they kind of drank their own Kool-Aid in a sense of they really thought that these couple games didn't matter and that they just kind of were able to go through the motions and, we had a kick return, which is great, but it's not that they're not trying. 'Cause, they're here. They've obviously tried. That's a silly thing to say, but it doesn't, I think you could finally see the team unlock itself and finally have the motivation to lock in and do what they're supposed to do to these FPS teams and these teams that shouldn't even be on the field with them in that sense.
I think unlock is a really good word. And I'd like to read a teeny tiny excerpt out of the article that's coming out about the EKU game.
Shameless plug.
Are you kidding me? You bring me on the podcast, I don't shameless plug, it'd be a missed opportunity. But I think it adds to the conversation. It's the only reason I'm doing this. Playing against inferior opponents is no reason to not play well coming out of the locker room. If anything, it's more reason to play well coming out of the locker room because Kentucky should be executing as if they're the better team as opposed to being complacent in that fact.
Absolutely.
I think that in the first 2 weeks, there has been complacency on both sides of the ball. Both sides of both guys in the offense and the defense are busy looking at the scoreboard, They're taking complacency in the fact that Kentucky's in the SEC. And if we're going to sit here as a group of four and talk about Kentucky's in the SEC, they need to be beating these guys. I think we're also failing to consider is that the team knows that. And I think the team knows that a little too much. And I think it's time to see that kind of straightforward execution that not only fans are expecting, but the coaching staff and the players are all expecting out of themselves as well. I think unlock is the perfect way to put it. And honestly, and I'll give you a free segue into Akron, I think the Akron game is going to be very telling as it's the last of their bye games before the conference schedule.
Yeah, I definitely think Akron is really the last chance for us to see them have 4 consistent quarters before we really get to the hard games. Like, as you might say, like Vanderbilt. Florida has a top 10 defense. Like Georgia, UC, they outscore anybody by 50. Alabama, even though they just lost, they're still, they're Alabama. So I feel like if they can't come out against Akron and have 4 consistent quarters, that's when I feel like urgency might come in,
And before we officially move on to talking about Akron, I just want to give a couple of shout-outs to a couple of different players that maybe won't be as talked about as much for UK. First being Alex Rayner, the kicker. He transferred here from Georgia Southern. He makes it look effortless, especially in the Ball State game. Unbelievable. He can kick it from anywhere, and it just looks easy for him.
It's refreshing to see that kind of leg. It really is. It's refreshing to see that kind of leg, and gives you confidence, especially in those games. We keep harping on them, but those SEC games where you can't afford those little mistakes because they're going to get you beat, even against a less superior SEC team. Because any team in the SEC can play, or they wouldn't be in the SEC. But you gotta have the ability to limit mistakes against any SEC team, or you're gonna lose.
Yeah, he's a perfect 12 for 12 on kicks so far.
And field goals win games.
Yeah.
In the SEC, field goals win games because when drives stall out, because in the SEC, you're playing SEC defenses. Drives do stall out. So to know that Kentucky has a reliable leg to bat or to lean on, I think it's gonna get them as dumb as surface level as it sounds, a few more points on the board this year, and that will make all the difference.
Yeah. And this shout out is a little bit more special. Josh and I both know this when we both went to a school in Lexington here, Lafayette High School. Hayden Daher, former Lafayette football legend, got to suit up for it the first time against Eastern Kentucky. Didn't get in the game, but it was cool to see former high school guy for us get in. So special shout out to good old Hayden Daher out there.
It was former quarterback, by the way. Former quarterback at
Turn
Lafayette,
linebacker.
But turn linebacker.
All right, but now on to Akron, who, looking ahead, not going to be necessarily a rollover game. Still one that Kentucky should win, and probably handedly, especially with it being a night game at Kroger. This is not going to be just let's roll the ball out there and see what happens. We got to win this game.
They do. Obviously, if you lose to Akron, you're talking about one of the worst losses in program history. Right, until you'd have to look back to as far as when Western Kentucky beat them to really find such like an equivalent loss. And even then, I don't think an Akron loss would equate to a Western Kentucky loss. It would be worse, right? There's
Vandy here by 40 might be towards there.
But it's still. But even Vanderbilt, as Vanderbilt is a D1 Power 5 opponent.
That's true.
They are a team that they can play a team like Akron and beat them. So I think the fact that we're even entertaining Kentucky losing this game is bad enough in and of itself. Yeah. But one thing I do want to talk about from Akron, and I don't know if anyone at this table knew this, is the turnover tire. Have you guys heard about the
What is a turnover tire?
Akron,
I'm intrigued.
So Akron is the rubber city, right? And obviously tires are made out of rubber. So they have a freaking turnover tire. And it is exactly what it sounds like. They get a turnover, they run to the sidelines, and they pull out a tire. And it's not a huge tire. It's like that's the best part about this. It's not some crazy semi tire that they're flipping over. It's a very modest spare tire. It's not super wide. It's not super tall. It's not super heavy. But they pull it out and they wave it in the air. It's a turnover tire. It started last week in their game against Morgan State. One of their players, Brian McCoy, had a scoop and score on the way to their win. They actually almost got upset, Akron, by Morgan State in their game last week, but that scoop and score, they were able to win 24-21. And when they did, there's a viral clip on ESPN of the turnover tire. And I just think that's and they said already they're bringing it to Kentucky. It's going to be on the sidelines. I think honestly, I think it's a little wrong to say that I'm hoping for a Kentucky turnover.
Okay, but if they don't get to use it, I kind of want somebody to reach out, and I want the turnover tire to come to the podcast. And I want next Tuesday, I want the turnover tire on the podcast.
Yeah, why should it come here? Why can't it go to the Louvre? why can't we hang it there, right? But no, let's seriously, we can talk about Akron a little bit. First off, they have 2 quarterbacks. I don't know if anyone knows. They have 2 quarterbacks, quite literally a balanced passing attack. And I don't think Kentucky has not seen a scheme like that yet. I think it's something that could trip them up a little bit. You know, it's an extra layer, an extra element of the game that they have to prepare for. And Akron, the Zips, are also bringing back first team All-MAC wide receiver Alex Adams, who had 855 rec yards last year. He had the 1 touchdown, 6 receptions, 75 yards against Morgan State last week. He's going to be something to watch for. Akron doesn't have a rushing attack. They had 8 rush yards last week against Morgan State. So we're not going to see them running the ball. I think it's going to be a great test of Kentucky's secondary. You know, I was really harping on that 3.7% number earlier in this episode, and I think that it's going to be a good, maybe not necessarily redemption opportunity, but it's going to be a good test of the secondary against an equitable passing attack with a couple of guys at wide receiver. Josiah Gathings is another one. He is second in receptions, and Alex Adams, I believe, is first. So those are really the 2 guys to watch for the Zips. But I think that Akron brings, you know, it's a bye game. I don't see why. I cannot imagine a world in which this is a loss for Kentucky. And I say that bearing in mind what happened against Eastern Kentucky last week. But I do think that there's going to be some tests along the way. And I'm just curious to see, especially defensively, how this shakes out.
And I mean, so they're opening as 26-point favorites the day we record this. So I mean, that's got to speak volumes. I think this has got to be the game where they finally, a lot of the gripes we've been kind of harping on, the secondary, the slow starts. This has got to be the game before they go into SEC play where they've got to come out and they've got to play their best ball that they played so far in the first half, first quarter, first drive. This has got to be where they come out and they do what they're supposed to do, and they win this game convincingly and have control of the game through all 4 quarters, just to kind of give not only the fan base but give themselves the confidence that they're where they're supposed to be. They're the team they're supposed to be, because going into SEC, it's gonna make or break the year. And I think if they can play with a confidence, Leary included in that. Leary's got to, I think he's got to come out. He's had a turnover in each game so far. I think a clean non-turnover game would be great to see from him. And I just think this will be the game where we finally, where we should hopefully see them settle in and figure out more of who they're going to be, because you can't keep experimenting into SEC play, or you're going to trip yourself up and you're going to lose. So I think this has got to be the statement game where they, settle all the questions down, and then we see more of what they're made of and how they stack up in the SEC.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I really do think that turnovers is going to be the key to this game, because last week Akron, they had 5 turnovers in total, and I feel like if Kentucky can force turnovers and they can take care of the ball, they should be okay, we hope. And I feel like they have to also kind of get better at their third down efficiency. Last year, they were able to keep their opponents at 33.3%, but this year so far is at 51.7% on third down tries, which is ranked 122 out of 132 teams. So they definitely need to do something about that, because you can't allow a team to be on the field longer than they're supposed to. When you get that stop, get the stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And both of you guys, I think those are really some very insightful points. I absolutely agree that, this is the dress rehearsal for Kentucky. I think in any context, whether I'm watching as a fan, whether I'm watching as a coach, whether I'm watching as an analyst, or this, that, or anything in between, I'm willing to put the Ball State and EKU performances behind me at this point. I am willing to let it go. I'm willing to forget about it. And I say this bearing in mind that I have an article coming out on this. Right?
Go read it.
Yeah, go read it. But I think it's time. I'm ready to let that go. And I think that this is absolutely the dress rehearsal. I think a clean slate from Devin Leary would be huge for the Kentucky offense. I think 4 efficient quarters that are backed by metrics could also be really good for Kentucky, although I don't think Liam Cohen walks out onto the field thinking about metrics, right? And no one should, for that matter. I think limiting or keeping the defense off the field as well, especially with the third down efficiency and things like that. All those are excellent points. And against a passing attack like this, we are going to see third down conversions from Akron because of how strong their passing attack is, because of the fast guys that they have. This is going to be a great test of the secondary. So if the secondary can lock down on third down, then I think it's going to be a very good sign. I absolutely think that Kentucky passes this dress rehearsal. Lock it in. My official prediction, I think Kentucky's dress rehearsal goes well. I think they're due, but the contingency on that, my one contingency to that, is that only happens if they come out of the locker room and play well, and they play 4 quarters of football. I think there is no world in which Kentucky plays 4 quarters of football that they don't pass this dress rehearsal. The pieces are there. It's time to put them together and to unleash, if you will.
Yeah,
and
I think this is a statement game. Yeah, it really is. This is a statement game. This is where it's kind of like, we can forget about it the last 2 weeks that haven't been what we thought they were going to be, but this is a game where they got to turn the page, kind of restart, revamp, and just come out and frankly dominate like they're supposed to. They're supposed to look like Akron doesn't belong on the field with them. That's how this is supposed to look. So if they can make it look that way and convincingly defeat them, I think that'll be all we need to see going into SEC, because after that it's all about execution. It's all about, and another quick side note, they got to limit the mistake. They had 10 penalties against EKU. That has got to get cleaned up. They cannot afford that going into games that are going to make or break this team's season, or they're going to beat themselves. It doesn't matter how well they execute, how well they play on defense or offense. If they continue to have these self-inflicted wounds, it's going to be their plague. It's going to be what kills them and doesn't allow them to succeed like they want to.
There's one point that I want to make to everybody at this table, because it's a point that Brad White, Liam Cohen, and Mark Stoops were all universally going on about post-game, and that is the term complementary football.
Absolutely.
I hear it a lot. Yep.
You hear it a lot, right? And it's a very common in coach speak, especially with respect to Coach Stoops. The coach speak that came after EKU, I thought his post-game comments were coach speak, and I say that with a, you got to go up and save face after a performance like that. I don't blame him for whipping out the coach speak, but it was coach speak at the end of the day, and I think that's where that term complementary football comes from. But I do think that something I've noticed is that on the field, I don't think I'm watching one team. I think I'm watching 2. I feel like I'm watching the offensive team and I'm watching the defensive team, almost like I'm watching a practice where they're competing against each other. I think unity is going to be something that's really important. Seeing the team come out as a collective group, again, out of the locker room, right? I'm gonna keep harping on that point, because it is the root of Kentucky's issues in the first 2 weeks. I think when you really sit and we can look at film and we can talk stats and third down efficiencies and this, that, and everything in between. It is the locker room. Coming out of the locker room is the issue with this football program right now, and I think that once they clean that up, then we'll really get a taste of what the team looks like. But I'm definitely looking to see some complementary. I will absolutely buy into all 3 of their comments about complementary football, because that was the biggest point that they had. It's that they need to play for each other. They need to complement each other. Limit the penalties. I think it was 80 yards in penalties that EKU got. I could be wrong.
Lord.
Or it was between 70 and 80 yards, but someone at home, if you're out there listening, can fact check me on that. But yeah, definitely complementary football is going to be one of the biggest points that I imagine Mark Stoops and company will be harping on this week heading into Saturday night's matchup.
Well, I think Josh has created 2 new T-shirts this week. I think he's got the Mark Stoops sitting up in the gaming chair T-shirt, and I think he's got the coming out of the locker room T-shirt on down, ready to come out.
Put that on the mug.
Now we do have to do our talking head cliche predictions, and I guess I'll toss to Josh. We'll go around in the circle here. We need a winner and a score.
A winner and a score. Well, give me Kentucky for the winner. And what's the spread? 26?
They're favored by 26 as of recording day, which was Tuesday
26.
of game week.
So in the first 2 weeks of Akron's football games, both of the scores have been 24-21. They lost 24-21 after they blew it against Temple, and they won 24-21 after surviving in the miracle when they got to whip out the turnover tire against Morgan State. I think they're going to be a bit slower on offense. I think Kentucky is going to be able. I think that there's going to be a couple of miscues from the Kentucky secondary. I think that's a pretty safe prediction to make. I think Akron's passing attack does come with some surprises. Give me a touchdown and 2 field goals. So 13 for Akron, and then I think Kentucky covers, make it 30. Give me around 40-13, 44. Wait, that was the ball. I think they matched the Kentucky Ball State score, 44-13.
I think that Kentucky will win by 2 touchdowns. I think they'll come out, have 4 consistent quarters, and I feel like the defense will play well. But I do think that Akron will at least score 17. So I might go 31-17 Kentucky.
Don't
wins.
do it to me, Michaela.
Wow.
Don't give me a heart attack over here.
So I think in order to do what they need to do, and some of the points we touched on about how they need to get off to a good start, they need to play 4 quarters. Under the impression that all that is going to happen, which could be a bold prediction that actually happens, but barring all of it, I think we're going to see, say, 40 points for the offense. So I'll say we'll go 42. We'll just say 6 touchdowns, or however they come about. And then I think see what we need to see from the defense. I think no more than 10 points need to be allowed. So I'm going to say 42-10. It seems pretty safe to me.
Yeah, and honestly, my prediction is 44-13, and I'm going to stand by that. I could also buy into 42-10.
I think we're going to see a very much more controlled version of what we saw against Ball State. I think 44-14, that was the score of the first game. I think we're going to see the same score, but I don't think Kentucky will ever look out of focus. I think from the open to the close, Mark Stoops is going to have his team ready, and they're going to look like a great football team, like a ranked football team that we've been waiting to see since the first kickoff.
Right, and I think theoretically you might be at home wondering, well, how are they going to score the same amount of points if they're going to perform better than they did at Ball State? There comes a point in football, and in my opinion, unless the other team has and I think the threshold is 40 points. I think if you're blowing out a team and you get to and it's a lot to a little, and you hit the 40-point mark at some point, and I can't explain it, and I'm sure that there's a metric that the game just slows down offensively. Maybe it's the change in personnel. By then, maybe it's the fact that you're in garbage time by then. But I don't think just because the score might be the same doesn't mean that any of the teams are going to be any less efficient on offense. So I have no doubt in my mind. Well, I say that maybe not doubt in my mind, but my prediction is that while the score will be the same, there will be more efficiency on both sides.
And I mean, to jog the memory of the Ball State game, we also had a kick return and a defensive touchdown as well. So, I mean, that also speaks to, kind of how, yes, it's good. It could be the same score, but it can be a tale of 2 different games.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a great point.
And I think we've all sat here and we've heard Josh use a lot of the more analytical words all day today, and I think that's a really valuable part of our show. So Josh already knows this, but every week from here on, starting next week, we're going to have a section of the show called Nerd Alert. Josh is going to get to come on, and he's going to talk to us about the advanced stats and the more analytical part of the game that I don't necessarily understand, but like we learned today about defended passes, I didn't know what that stat meant. Josh taught us that today.
Havoc rates.
Havoc rates.
It's called havoc rates for those of you at home.
So, yeah, I'm excited. Josh will be back every week from here on, and I'm sure we'll have you guys back at some point throughout the year.
Absolutely.
And we'll get to talk a little bit more. And before we go, I want to start something that I want to do at the end of every episode called the Wildcat Check-In. Of course, right now we're really focused on football, and we will be really focused on basketball when that starts. But there's other sports going on at UK. We've got soccer going on. We've got softball going on. We've got baseball about to happen. And I think Jonathan wanted to touch on some baseball scrimmages we might be seeing soon.
Absolutely. So they announced last week that they've got 2 games announced so far, and the first one is going to be versus Michigan. That's going to be taking place in Mason, Ohio. So that's a little ways away, of course, but if you want your baseball fix, they are playing Morehead State at Kentucky Proud Park on October 29th. So circle that on your calendars if you are wanting to see some baseball back in the Bluegrass before the spring.
Consider my calendar circled.
Yeah, we love Kentucky Proud Park. Did you guys have any other sports you wanted to talk about?
We touched on this a little bit, but Kentucky women's soccer, you guys look out for them. They're undefeated right now for the first time since 2007 going to SEC play. And Jordan Rose, a fifth-year graduate student, she's 2 away from breaking the record for most goals scored. And their next game is Saturday against Texas A&M. So look out for them. They're playing really well. This is probably one of their best seasons in a long time. And, yeah, they're doing pretty good right now.
Well, and on women's soccer, I think that would be my shout out if I could give one. And honestly, a player I do want to shout out is Ulfa Starter. I know that's a mouthful of a name, but look her up. Her first name is spelled ULFA, Ulfa Starter. And she has been absolutely dominant recently. I think she's definitely been an impact player for the women's soccer team. I had the privilege of watching the game from the press box against Belmont when I was out there covering it for the Kernel, and she was absolutely an impact performer, and I think she's going to be a very big piece of the team as they head into SEC play and hopefully the postseason.
And the women have been great for UK soccer so far. The men struggled a little bit out of the gate, but we know they win it. They came into the season number 2 in the country. We know they're a good soccer team. They're waiting on a couple players to come back that were started the season injured. They're going to surge, and they're going to have a great season as well, I'm sure. And I want to thank everybody who came in, got to listen to us. I want to thank Jonathan, Michaela, Josh. Thank you for coming on, talking to me today. We had a great time. I hope you guys had a great time.
Absolutely.
And yeah, thank you so much for listening. This has been the Kentucky Kernel Podcast about sports on the Kentucky Kernel Podcast Network. Thank you so much.